that was taught even as an undergraduate I was at Santa Barbara in the 1961 to 1960 to mid-year of 1965 when I graduated. And Santa Barbara is one of the places that exploded, and they burned down the Bank of America and the student, the student living area, and it made national news. But there really wasn't any really dramatic sense that the 60s was affecting Santa Barbara. It was still a pretty casual campus, a little bit of protest about free speech, but not much about war in Vietnam. And then in academia, the symbolic interactionists weren't paying attention to Marx anyhow. They weren't particularly interested in him. And so I didn't even get the sense that there was this big divide. I did know that conflict theory was good and functionalism was kind of bad. I was taught that Parsons and Merton and all these functionalists, they were old school, and that a new conflict perspective was coming back. But they were interested in symbolic interaction or general systems theory, which wasn't either of those things. So I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, but I was aware of it. And then when I got to Cornell, they didn't have a conflict theorist there. It was some of the people like Williams were sort of functionalists, and others were social psychologists that I studied with. And so a lot was going on in the field during that time, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. And then the 60s in graduate school really didn't hit me, and it was only the year after I left. I left in 1968, and that's when that next year is when the students took the guns into the student union, and so Cornell got immediately politicized. But before then, there was some undergraduates running around protesting this and that, but I didn't pay a lot of attention to that. I was studying. I didn't have time for that. Mm-hmm. And then the sort of consensus theory versus conflict theory, to me, was always overdrawn. I think people made completely unfair accusations about functionalism. Some of them were legitimate. And then as an alternative, they saw everything as conflict. Well, yeah, lots of things are in conflict, but lots of things are integrated. So to me, it just all felt like a polarization that wasn't very interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I was interested in what Marx had to say and what the conflict theorist has to say. And a lot of my first articles were formalizing their theories. And a lot of those, maybe 6 or 7 of them, appeared in Social Forces in the early part of my career. And I was interested in what they were actually saying and the arguments they made. And then I wasn't going to make a value judgment whether those are good or bad. And that's one of the things I did a little bit of that when I was young and beginning to write. But later on, I stopped that completely. So anyway, it was a big deal, but it always struck me as too simplistic, like a lot of dichotomies of that nature. Micro, macro, consensus, conflict, really overblown, overstated. And so the really important point is, what are the conditions that generate conflict, and what are the conditions that generate integration? That's what I was interested in. I wasn't interested in the sort of politicization of sociology. And I'm even more dismayed by sociology because that's what's happened. It's become highly politicized. ASA is another social movement organization, but a rather irrelevant one. Who pays attention to ASA and what they think about anything?
It's true.
No one respects us because they don't think we're scientists. If we're not scientists, we're not respected. And people can run around screaming justice and this and that, but they're just doing it with a credible impotence that they talk to each other and have no effect whatsoever on the society. And if I was going to be serious about having an effect on society, it wouldn't be by being an activist. I'd be by making sociology relevant to the problems that people have. And most sociologists don't do that. They have a very narrow ideological agenda.
Do you think those people who are yelling justice are necessarily on the conflict theory side, or are they atheoretical all the way?
I guess they're sort of on the conflict theory side, but my impression is they don't read a lot of theory. They're not interested in it. Theory is establishment. Theory is conservative. Theory doesn't get out there and say it like what it is. And they're right about that. The theory isn't, and even critical theories, but critical theories that are articulated are so simplistic and so naive and so almost irrelevant to understanding the world because they're so ideologically driven. They're not very interesting to me. Sometimes there's something in there that's interesting, and I'll adopt that. But basically, once you do that, once you politicize a discipline, there's no going back, and that's what's happening. It's becoming institutionalized. It was one thing; it was a debate among professors, but when the discipline, when it gets so that you can't elect a president at ASA who's not interested in social justice, and that's pretty much what's happened. You've lost the discipline. The discipline is not even worth belonging to. I belong to it out of loyalty to sociology, but I'm not very impressed with what's going on in sociology these days.
Yeah.